My name is Blair, and I am 33 years old. My mother gave me an ultimatum at Christmas dinner in front of 50 relatives. She looked me in the eyes and said, "Pay for your sister $200,000 dream wedding, or you are no longer part of this family." My dad stood up and pointed his finger at me, declaring that everyone at this table agrees I owe her this money. Now they are calling me 136 times a day, leaving 56 voicemails crying and begging for my help. Before I share my story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe to see how I turned their perfect holiday ambush into the ultimate reckoning. The driveway of my parents' Connecticut mansion was jammed with luxury vehicles when I pulled up in my practical sedan. This was exactly how my parents, Richard and Barbara, wanted it. To the outside world, they were the picture of suburban wealth and success. Inside the house was a suffocating theater of appearances. I parked near the back of the property, taking a moment to breathe the crisp winter air before stepping into the lion's den. I had spent my entire life being treated as the family disappointment because I chose mathematics and data over country club socializing. They had no idea that my little tech project was actually an artificial intelligence auditing firm currently valued in the hundreds of millions. To them, I was just Blair, the stubborn daughter who drove a normal car and wore understated clothes. The moment I opened the heavy oak front door, the sheer volume of the gathering hit me. 50 extended family members were crammed into the sprawling living room and grand foyer. Aunts, uncles, and cousins I had not seen in years were holding crystal champagne flutes and admiring the 20-foot Christmas tree. The air was thick with expensive perfume and the smell of roasted meats. My mother Barbara immediately spotted me from across the room. She wore a tailored velvet dress and a strained smile that never reached her eyes. She did not walk over to greet me. Instead, she turned her back and continued laughing with my aunt. This was the usual dynamic. I was tolerated, never welcomed. In the center of the room stood my younger sister, Whitney. At 30 years old, she was the undisputed golden child. She was draped in designer silk, holding court, with a group of admiring cousins. Beside her stood her fiancé, Andre Washington. Andre was 32 years old, an African-American investment fund manager from a prominent old money family in Atlanta. He had an undeniable presence, tall and impeccably dressed in a bespoke suit, but his arrogance preceded him. Andre thrived on letting everyone know he was the smartest and richest person in any room. I grabbed a glass of water from a passing tray and tried to blend into the background, observing the performance. Whitney spotted me and nudged Andre. They made their way over wearing matching expressions of condescension. "Glad you could make it," Whitney said, looking me up and down. "I thought you might be too busy crunching numbers in a cubicle somewhere." Andre chuckled, swirling the amber liquid in his crystal glass. "I heard you are still doing that data stuff," he said, his voice dripping with superiority. "You know my fund moves more capital in an hour than your little startup will see in a decade. If you ever need a small business loan, just let my assistant know." I smiled politely, taking a sip of my water. "I appreciate the offer, Andre, but my company is managing just fine." Whitney rolled her eyes and adjusted the massive diamond engagement ring on her finger, making sure the overhead chandelier caught its sparkle. "Well, try not to bore the guests tonight," she warned. "His parents are flying in tomorrow, and we need everything to be absolutely perfect. The Washingtons have a certain standard, and frankly, your whole independent working woman aesthetic is a bit depressing." Andre patted her shoulder approvingly. "Do not worry about her, babe," he said to Whitney. "She is just doing what she can. We cannot all be at the top of the food chain." They wandered away to greet more important relatives, leaving me alone by the staircase. I watched them mingle, noting the desperate way my father Richard hovered around Andre. Richard was laughing too loudly at his jokes, nodding too vigorously at his opinions. It was a pathetic display of a man trying to secure his proximity to real power. The entire room revolved around this upcoming wedding. Every conversation I overheard was about the venue in Lake Como, the custom floral arrangements, the exclusive guest list. It was a massive financial undertaking, and knowing my parents, they were bleeding themselves dry to impress the Washington family. The pressure in the house felt incredibly dense tonight. The catering staff began chiming small silver bells, signaling that dinner was served. The massive dining room had been extended into the conservatory to seat all 50 guests at one long continuous table decorated with towering floral centerpieces and silver candelabras. I found my assigned seat at the very end of the table, seated next to a teenage cousin who was busy texting under the tablecloth. This placement was deliberate. I was physically and symbolically pushed to the margins of the family. As everyone took their places, the loud chatter slowly died down. My mother stood at the head of the table holding her champagne glass. She tapped it with a silver spoon, demanding absolute silence. The trap was finally set, and all eyes turned directly toward me as she took a deep breath to deliver her shocking holiday surprise. I sat back, crossing my arms, completely ready to watch their delusions catch fire and burn before my eyes. Barbara smiled, a wide, practiced expression designed to project maternal warmth to the 50 relatives gathered around the massive table. She cleared her throat, holding her crystal flute high. "Thank you all for joining us tonight," she began, her voice carrying easily across the room. "Christmas is a time for family, a time for reflection, and most importantly, a time to support one another. We are so incredibly blessed to have you all here under one roof, especially as we look forward to the most spectacular event of the coming year." She gestured gracefully toward Whitney and Andre. "My beautiful daughter and her exceptional fiancé are embarking on a journey that will unite two remarkable families. The Lake Como wedding will be nothing short of breathtaking. It is going to be the kind of celebration that honors the standard of excellence both our family and the Washington family uphold." The relatives murmured their enthusiastic agreement. Glasses clinked. Whitney beamed, resting her hand on Andre's chest. Andre gave a subtle, arrogant nod of acknowledgement. I kept my face entirely blank, watching my mother pace the floor at the head of the table. I knew a setup when I saw one. But as we all know, Barbara continued, her tone shifting from joyous to serious. "Grand events require grand commitments. Richard and I have always taught our girls the value of family duty. We believe that those who have the means must uplift those who are stepping into their defining moments." She turned her gaze entirely on me. The entire room followed her eyes. 50 heads pivoted in my direction. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the crackle of the fireplace. "Blair," my mother said, her voice dropping the maternal warmth and taking on a sharp, commanding edge, "you have lived a very independent life. We have allowed you to pursue your little math projects and keep to yourself. But now it is time for you to step up and fulfill your role in this family. Whitney deserves the wedding of her dreams, and Andre deserves a celebration fitting his stature. Therefore, Richard and I have decided that you will be the primary sponsor for the Lake Como wedding. The cost is $200,000, and we expect you to write the check by the end of the week." I stared at her, genuinely impressed by the sheer audacity of the demand. She did not ask. She did not request. She commanded me to hand over $200,000 in front of 50 people, as if she were ordering a simple side dish at a restaurant. I slowly uncrossed my arms and placed my hands flat on the table. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level, "you cannot be serious. You are demanding I pay for a $200,000 party." "I am entirely serious," she snapped, abandoning her polite facade completely. "You owe this to your sister. You have no husband, no children, and no real responsibilities. You live selfishly. It is time you contribute to the legacy of this family. We have done the math. Even with your modest business, you can easily take out a loan or liquidate whatever small assets you have." The psychological pressure in the room intensified immediately. I could feel the collective weight of 50 pairs of eyes judging me. My aunt whispered something to my uncle, shaking her head in disapproval. A cousin across the table glared at me as if I had just insulted the entire bloodline. They were all complicit in this ambush orchestrated by my parents to publicly shame me into absolute submission. "Let us be clear," my mother continued, raising her voice so it echoed off the high ceilings. "This is not a request, Blair. This is a family mandate. You will pay for your sister's wedding, or you are no longer part of this family. If you refuse to support your own flesh and blood during the most important moment of her life, then you are dead to us. You will not be welcome in this house. You will not attend the wedding, and you will be cut off from every single person sitting at this table. The threat hung in the air, heavy and absolute. My mother was leveraging the entire extended family against me, betting that my fear of isolation would force me to open my checkbook. She thought she was dealing with the awkward, eager-to-please daughter she used to bully in high school. She had no idea she was trying to extort the chief executive officer of an artificial intelligence firm who handled hostile corporate takeovers before breakfast. I looked at Whitney. My sister was smirking, a triumphant gleam in her eyes. She clearly believed this was a done deal. Andre leaned back in his chair, looking amused, enjoying the spectacle of my public humiliation. He leaned over and whispered something in Whitney's ear, causing her to stifle a laugh. They truly believed I was trapped. I looked around the long dining table. Not a single relative spoke up in my defense. Not one person questioned the sanity of demanding $200,000 from a family member under the threat of exile. They were all waiting for me to break, waiting for me to lower my head cry and agree to the extortion just to save my place in their toxic hierarchy. The heat in the room felt oppressive, the smell of the food suddenly nauseating. My mother stood tall at the head of the table, her champagne glass still in hand, waiting for my surrender. She expected me to beg for forgiveness, to promise I would find the money to do whatever it took to keep my family intact. Instead, I felt a deep sense of liberation wash over me. I took a slow, deliberate breath, preparing to deliver my final clear answer to them all. I picked up my heavy silver dinner fork and set it down against the fine porcelain plate. The sharp clink echoed loudly through the totally silent dining room like a gunshot. I deliberately kept my posture relaxed and my gaze locked entirely on my mother. "No," I said. My mother blinked clearly, struggling to process the single spoken syllable that had just completely dismantled her elaborate trap. "Excuse me?" My mother snapped back, her voice trembling with rising fury. "I said no," I repeated, ensuring my voice carried to the very back of the room where my distant cousins were straining to hear. "I will not be paying $200,000 to fund a wedding. You issued an ultimatum, and I have given you my answer." My father, Richard, shot up to his feet, scraping his chair violently against the hardwood floor. His face was flushed crimson. He slammed both of his fists down onto the dining table so hard that the crystal glasses rattled. "How dare you speak to your mother that way?" he roared, his booming voice vibrating against the glass of the conservatory. "You ungrateful, selfish girl. We gave you everything. We put a roof over your head. We fed you. We allowed you to live under our protection. You owe this family a debt. You owe Whitney a debt for carrying the social weight of this family while you hid away in your miserable little apartment playing with numbers." I stared at my father, marveling at the sheer delusion of his tirade. He genuinely believed that my existence was a loan I was expected to pay back with interest. "I owe you absolutely nothing," I said, keeping my tone deadly calm to contrast his explosive rage. "You chose to have children. I did not ask to be born into a family that views love as a financial transaction. If Whitney wants a $200,000 party, she can fund it herself." Whitney let out a dramatic sob, burying her face in Andre's shoulder. "Oh my God," she wailed, her voice muffled against his custom-tailored jacket. "She has always been jealous of me. She cannot stand to see me happy because she is so lonely and pathetic." Andre wrapped a protective arm around Whitney and glared at me. He leaned forward, resting his expensive watch against the edge of the table. "Look, Blair," he said, using a tone reserved for reprimanding a slow employee. "Let us be real here for a second. We all know your little startup is struggling. We know you are probably living paycheck to paycheck trying to keep the lights on. I mean, look at the sedan you parked outside. It is an absolute joke. But throwing a temper tantrum in front of everyone just because you are broke is not a good look for anyone." He scoffed, shaking his head. "If you are that desperate for cash, maybe you should have worked harder instead of dropping out of the real corporate world to chase fake tech dreams. But do not sit here and disrespect my future wife, because you cannot afford to play in the big leagues. My family is flying in from Atlanta today, expecting a certain caliber of event. If you cannot pull your weight, then maybe you do not belong in this family. You are embarrassing yourself and you are embarrassing them. I looked at Andre, taking in his arrogant posture and his desperate need to assert dominance over someone he deemed lesser. He was a man who hid behind generational wealth, assuming that my plain clothing and quiet demeanor meant I was a total financial failure. He had absolutely no idea that my company could buy his entire investment fund and sell it for spare parts before lunch. But I was not going to reveal my hand. Not here. Not yet. I wanted them to dig their hole as deep as humanly possible before I buried them in it. I pushed my chair back and stood up. The fabric of my simple black dress brushed against the heavy mahogany table. I picked up my purse and slung the strap over my shoulder. I am not embarrassed, Andre, I said, making direct eye contact with him before shifting my gaze to my parents. I am actually disgusted. You invited me here tonight not to celebrate a holiday, but to ambush me for cash. You paraded our relatives around to use them as an intimidation tactic. You threatened to disown me over a party. If that is what it takes to be part of this family, then you can consider my membership permanently revoked. My father pointed a trembling finger toward the front door. If you walk out that door right now, you are finished, he bellowed, his face contorting with pure rage. Do you hear me, Blair? You are finished. We will cut you off completely. You will never set foot in this house again. I am counting on it, I replied. I slowly turned my back. I walked away from the lavish dinner spread, the towering Christmas tree, and their suffocating suburban facade. My heels clicked rhythmically against the marble floor of the foyer. I did not look back. I did not shed a single tear. I did not feel a shred of guilt. As I pulled the heavy oak front door open, the crisp winter wind hit my face, bringing a rush of absolute clarity. The ultimatum hung in the air behind me, but I had already won the moment. I stepped out into the dark driveway, leaving their toxic theater behind. My departure was cold, swift, and final. I got into my sedan, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway. As the mansion faded in my rearview mirror, my mind immediately shifted to my next move. They wanted to play a game of financial ruin and family loyalty. They had absolutely no idea I was about to rewrite the rules entirely. The drive back to the city was quiet inside my car, but my phone was a different story. The screen lit up in a relentless rhythm, vibrating violently. I connected the audio to my dashboard, letting notifications play out loud. It was a torrential downpour of digital harassment. The text messages popped up very rapidly. My aunt called me a bitter, jealous woman who hated seeing her sister happy. My uncle demanded I turn around, march back into the dining room, and apologize on my knees. Distant cousins accused me of ruining Christmas, breaking my parents' hearts, and being a miserly failure, hoarding meager savings, while the family bent over backward to include me. Barbara wasted absolutely no time. Within 10 minutes of my departure, she had spun her narrative, playing the devastated matriarch to 50 gullible relatives. She painted me as the villain, the ungrateful scapegoat spitting in the face of family duty. Voicemails rolled in next. I let them play while navigating the icy highway. My mother sobbed theatrically into the receiver. "Blair, how could you do this?" she wailed, her voice cracking with practiced precision. "We just wanted to make you part of Whitney's day. You humiliated us in front of the Washingtons. You are a cold, heartless girl. I hope you are happy sitting alone in your miserable little apartment." I reached out and ended the audio playback. I completely refused to let their toxic chorus ruin my evening. They wanted me isolated, broke, and ashamed, trembling in a cheap rental unit. They were operating on outdated intelligence. An hour later, I pulled into the private underground parking garage of a glittering glass high-rise in the heart of downtown. A uniformed valet stepped forward to take the keys to my unremarkable sedan. I only drove that car to Connecticut to maintain my cover. My actual daily driver, an imported custom sports car, sat safely under a protective cover in my reserved spot. I swiped my secure access card and stepped into the private express elevator. The doors slid shut and the elevator shot up to the top floor of the building. When the doors opened, I stepped directly into my actual reality. My penthouse was a masterclass in modern luxury and cutting-edge technology. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking, unobstructed, 270-degree panoramic view of the city skyline. The interior was sleek, minimalist, and designed for absolute efficiency. Smart glass panels separated my living quarters from my expansive home office. The walls were lined with original contemporary art, and the kitchen featured imported Italian marble. I walked across the dark hardwood floors, dropping my coat onto a custom leather sofa that cost more than my parents' first mortgage. I walked over to the kitchen island, poured myself a glass of vintage red wine, and finally took a moment to appreciate the silence. There was no screaming, no belittling, no aggressive posturing, just the quiet hum of my servers in the next room. I stepped into my home office, which looked more like a corporate command center. 6 massive curved monitors sat on a polished steel desk. As the founder and chief executive officer of a premier artificial intelligence auditing and financial analysis firm, data was my lifeblood. My company provided deep-level forensic accounting for multinational corporations, identifying corporate fraud, hidden liabilities, and structural vulnerabilities that human auditors regularly missed. We handled contracts worth tens of millions of dollars. The idea that my father thought I needed to beg for a job, or that Andre viewed me as a struggling amateur, was the greatest comedy of the evening. I set my wine glass down and tapped the spacebar on my keyboard. The screens flared to life, illuminating the dark room with streams of real-time market data and complex algorithms. I picked up my phone again. The notification count had climbed to 82 text messages and 14 new voicemails. I scrolled through the sheer volume of hate and manipulation. My father had sent a final text message. It read, "You have until Friday to wire the funds to my account, or you are legally and permanently severed from this family." I stared at the screen, letting my analytical mind take over. The emotional noise faded away, leaving only cold, hard facts. My parents were incredibly image-conscious people. They loved displaying their wealth. Yet they had just staged a highly desperate, publicly humiliating ambush to extort $200,000 in liquid cash from the daughter they despised. And they needed it by the end of the week. Rich people do not demand cash on a deadline from estranged family members to pay for a wedding. If Richard and Barbara were truly as wealthy as they pretended to be, they would simply liquidate a minor asset, sell some stock, or use a high-limit credit card. The sheer panic in my father's voice, the aggressive timeline, and the absolute desperation to force me into compliance did not point to a family trying to teach a lesson. It pointed to a family facing an imminent financial collapse. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair and steepled my fingers. They had tried to paint me as a failure. They had tried to weaponize my relatives against me. But they had made a critical miscalculation. They had provoked an apex predator in the financial data ecosystem. I decided right then that I was not going to block their numbers. I was going to let them keep digging their own graves via text message. Meanwhile, I was going to find out exactly why my father was sweating over a relatively small sum of money. I logged into my secure encrypted corporate network and bypassed the standard firewalls. I opened a new investigative file and typed Richard's name into the search parameter. It was time to unleash my algorithms and see exactly what skeletons my family was hiding in their pristine suburban closets. I opened a secure communication channel to my core forensic accounting team. It was late on a Sunday night, but in the world of high-stakes corporate intelligence, my elite analysts were always on call. I typed a direct message to Silas, my lead data architect, and Nora, my senior financial investigator. I bypassed the usual pleasantries. I need a comprehensive deep dive into Richard and his primary import business. Pull every public record, tax filing, property deed, and corporate registration associated with his name over the past 10 years. I want to see his debt-to-income ratio, his revolving credit lines, and any secondary mortgages tied to the Connecticut estate. Trace the shell companies if they exist. Silas responded within 60 seconds. Consider it done. Running the parameters through the predictive algorithm now. Nora chimed in right after, pulling commercial loan histories and flagging any recent massive capital withdrawals. Do you have a specific target in mind? I need to know why a man who claims to be a highly successful corporate executive is suddenly staging a desperate extortion attempt for a measly $200,000 in liquid cash, I typed back. People with actual wealth do not panic over that kind of money. They leverage it, find the leak, find the rot. While Silas and Nora unleashed our proprietary artificial intelligence models on my father's financial footprint, my personal phone continued its pathetic symphony of buzzes and chimes on the kitchen island. I poured the last sip of my vintage red wine and watched the screen light up with a new text message from my sister Whitney. She was calling me a jealous, toxic spinster who was trying to ruin the happiest season of her life out of pure spite. I did not feel a single ounce of anger reading her words. I only felt an icy clinical curiosity. Whitney had spent her entire existence wrapped in a cocoon of unearned luxury, utterly dependent on our parents' bank accounts to sustain her flawless suburban princess persona. If Richard was actually out of money, her entire reality was about to shatter into a million jagged pieces. I walked back to my command center and pulled up a secondary screen. I decided to run a preliminary background check on Andre Washington and his supposedly invincible investment fund. Andre had been far too eager to belittle me at the dinner table. He had worn his generational wealth like a weapon, using it to bludgeon anyone he deemed inferior. But men who boast loudly about moving capital usually have something massive to hide. Old money families in Atlanta were notoriously tight-lipped about their assets. Andre's loud, flashy behavior contradicted the very nature of his supposed upbringing. I set the algorithm to quietly scrape the regulatory filings for his fund cross-referencing his stated assets under management with actual market performance metrics. The hours slipped by in absolute silence. The glow of the monitors illuminated my face as I watched lines of code and financial spreadsheets begin to populate the screens. My software was specifically designed to find the invisible threads connecting disparate financial anomalies. It looked for the money that was missing, the phantom loans, the overvalued assets, and the desperate shuffling of capital from one sinking ship to another. This was the exact technology that had allowed my company to secure massive contracts with federal regulators and top-tier corporate clients. Turning it against my own family felt incredibly poetic. Around 3 in the morning, Nora sent an encrypted file to my secure inbox. Her accompanying message contained only 2 words: jackpot acquired. I opened the file and maximized it across my central monitor. The data was visually represented through a series of color-coded graphs and interconnected nodes. At first glance, my father's financial portfolio looked perfectly normal. On paper, his import business showed consistent revenue streams, and his Connecticut mansion was appraised at a highly respectable market value. This was the illusion he sold to his country club friends, his golf buddies, and apparently to his future son-in-law. But when my artificial intelligence peeled back the top layer of accounting tricks, the underlying reality was breathtakingly disastrous. Silas initiated a secure voice call. I answered, putting him on speakerphone. "Are you seeing this, Blair?" Silas asked, his voice thick with professional disbelief. "Your father is running a masterclass in financial smoke and mirrors. I had the algorithm cross-check his commercial inventory reports against actual shipping manifests and customs declarations." "What did you find?" I asked, leaning closer to the screen. "He has been falsifying his revenue for at least 24 months, Silas explained. The import business lost its 3 biggest overseas suppliers 2 years ago. To cover the massive shortfall in cash flow, he started taking out high-interest commercial loans, using the company assets as collateral. But that was not enough to maintain his personal lifestyle. He has been bleeding the corporate accounts dry to pay for the country club memberships, the luxury cars, and your mother's designer wardrobe." I scrolled down to the section detailing his personal real estate assets. The Connecticut mansion, the pristine fortress where I had just been publicly humiliated, was highlighted in glaring red warning indicators. Nora joined the voice call. "Check the property deeds on his primary residence," she instructed. "He refinanced the house 3 separate times in the last 5 years. He completely exhausted the original equity. But it gets worse. 6 months ago, he took out a highly predatory private loan against the remaining perceived value of the estate. He missed the last 3 payments. The bank is currently quietly preparing the preliminary paperwork for a total foreclosure." I stared at the glowing red numbers on my screen. The math did not lie. My father was not a successful executive. He was a desperate drowning man holding onto a sinking anchor. He owed millions. He had absolutely zero liquid capital, and he was about to lose the only physical asset that validated his entire social existence. The house was going to be seized by the bank. But that still did not explain the aggressive $200,000 ultimatum for a wedding in Lake Como. Why insist on throwing an international luxury event when you are weeks away from losing your home? I prompted my team. There has to be a catalyst. People facing foreclosure do not book villas in Italy unless there is a guaranteed return on investment. Nora pulled up a new document on my shared screen. I think I found the missing puzzle piece, she said. It is all about the son-in-law. I nodded slowly, staring directly at the screen. Nora brought up a secondary window displaying highly confidential draft contracts our artificial intelligence had scraped from a hidden directory on my father's corporate server. These are investment proposals, Nora explained, highlighting critical clauses in bright yellow. Your father has been drafting them for 3 months. He is positioning his failing import business as a highly lucrative venture ripe for a private equity buyout. Look at the target demographic for this pitch. I zoomed in on the recipient field. The proposal was addressed directly to Andre Washington and his Atlanta-based investment fund. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with sickening clarity. Richard was not just trying to host a fancy party. He was staging an elaborate high-stakes financial con. Silas let out a low whistle over the audio channel. He is trying to trap the Washington family into bailing him out. He needs Andre to sign that investment deal to save him from total bankruptcy and criminal negligence charges. The Washingtons are old money. They are conservative and highly suspicious of bad investments. If they catch a single whiff of financial instability from your family, Andre will pull the plug on the wedding and the business deal. Exactly, I said, the absolute sheer audacity of my parents' scheme washing over me. Richard and Barbara needed to project an aura of immense, untouchable wealth to keep Andre on the hook. A modest local wedding would raise immediate red flags for a family like the Washingtons. They had to throw an opulent, over-the-top international event at a venue like Lake Como to prove they belonged in the exact same tax bracket. It was the ultimate fake-it-until-you-make-it strategy played out on a multi-million-dollar stage. But there is a major problem with their timeline, Nora added, bringing up a ledger of unpaid invoices. The Italian vendors, luxury wedding planners, and private charter companies do not accept credit based on suburban prestige. They require massive cash deposits up front. Your father has maxed out every credit card, drained his business accounts, and borrowed against a house the bank is already preparing to seize. He has absolutely zero liquidity left. If he does not pay the Lake Como deposits by the end of this week, vendors will cancel the entire event. And if the wedding gets canceled for lack of funds, the Washington family will immediately realize they are marrying into a bankrupt, fraudulent household, I concluded. The investment deal falls apart, the house gets foreclosed on, and Richard faces total public humiliation and potential federal fraud charges. That is why they cornered you tonight, Silas said softly. You were their absolute last resort. They needed a fast, untraceable cash injection to keep the illusion alive, just long enough to get Andre to sign the corporate bailout paperwork after the honeymoon. They did not want you to be part of the family. They just wanted to use you as a human ATM machine to fund their criminal enterprise. I leaned back in my chair and let out a sharp, humorless laugh. My mother had stood in that dining room dripping with fake maternal disappointment, telling me I owed the family a debt. She had weaponized 50 relatives against me, threatening me with exile, all while she and my father were standing on the absolute edge of financial ruin. They were willing to bankrupt their own daughter to subsidize a scam. They were willing to drain my hard-earned savings just to maintain their pathetic country club facade for a few more months. The sheer scale of their toxicity was almost magnificent. For years, I had internalized their constant criticism. I had believed their narrative that I was the flawed, inadequate scapegoat of the family. But looking at these glowing monitors surrounded by undeniable data, the emotional hold they had over me completely evaporated. I was not the failure. I was the only competent solvent adult in my entire bloodline. Print everything I ordered my team, my voice ringing with unshakable authority. Every falsified tax return, hidden loan, unpaid vendor invoice, and draft proposal targeting Andre's fund. Build a comprehensive, airtight dossier. I want it perfectly formatted, cross-referenced, and ready for immediate deployment. You got it, boss, Silas replied, the sound of rapid keystrokes echoing over the line. Are you planning to drop this on them right away? No, I said, a cold smile touching the corners of my mouth. If I confront them now, they will lie, deny the evidence, and try to spin a new narrative. They thrive on manipulating the situation behind closed doors. I am not going to give them the opportunity to control the fallout. We are going to let them keep digging their hole. We will let them keep swiping those declined credit cards and making promises they cannot keep. I closed the connection with my team and stood up from my desk. The sun was just beginning to rise over the city skyline, casting a brilliant golden light through my penthouse windows. The panicked text messages from my relatives had finally stopped, likely because they had all gone to sleep satisfied that they had properly chastised the family disappointment. They were probably dreaming of their luxurious Italian vacation, completely oblivious to the fact that their entire reality was built on a foundation of lies and unpaid debts. I walked into my sleek kitchen and poured a cup of dark roast coffee. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text message from Whitney. She was demanding we meet for coffee later that week so she could allow me to apologize to Andre and hand over the wedding funds. The sheer delusion was intoxicating. I took a sip of my coffee, feeling a profound sense of peace. I was going to agree to her coffee shop meeting. It was the perfect stage to set my trap. I replied to Whitney with a simple confirmation. We agreed to meet on Tuesday afternoon at an absurdly overpriced coffee boutique in the financial district. It was exactly the kind of establishment where people went to be seen rather than to drink coffee. I deliberately chose to wear a plain gray sweater and dark jeans. If they wanted to believe I was a desperate woman on the brink of financial collapse, I was happy to dress the part. Playing into their profound delusions was the easiest way to make them show their hand. When I walked through the glass doors, I spotted them immediately. Whitney and Andre were seated at a premium corner table, looking like an advertisement for unearned arrogance. Whitney wore a designer trench coat, her massive engagement ring catching the ambient light. Andre was dressed in a sharp, tailored suit, typing aggressively on his smartphone to project the image of a demanded executive. They did not stand up when I approached. Whitney simply gestured to the empty metal chair across from them with a perfectly manicured hand. Glad you showed up, Whitney said, her tone dripping with fake sympathy. Sit down. We already ordered you a black coffee. We know you are probably watching your expenses right now, so it is on us. I took the seat, leaving the coffee untouched. I looked directly at my sister, waiting for the inevitable performance to begin. I am here, I said evenly. You said you wanted to give me a chance to apologize and hand over the wedding funds. I am listening. Whitney sighed heavily, exchanging a patronizing look with her fiancé. Andre set his phone face down on the marble table and leaned forward. Let us drop the act, Blair, he said, his voice smooth and incredibly condescending. We all know you do not have $200,000 sitting around. We know your little data company is bleeding cash. You embarrassed yourself on Christmas Eve because you were backed into a corner and too proud to admit you are broke. Your parents are furious, but Whitney has a soft heart. She begged me to help you find a way back into the family. I maintained a neutral expression, letting him dig his trench. How exactly do you plan to help me, Andre? I asked. He smiled, clearly relishing the opportunity to play the wealthy savior to a pathetic charity case. I am a problem solver, he boasted. My investment fund manages serious capital. I look at struggling startups every single day. I know how hard it is for amateur founders to keep the lights on. I am willing to personally write a check for $200,000 to your father today. We will tell your parents the money came from you. He paused, letting the magnitude of his supposed generosity sink in. You get to save face, Andre continued. You get to be the hero who funded your sister's dream wedding. You get to stay in the family, and your parents will finally give you the respect you have been begging them for your entire life. It is the perfect bailout for you. All your familial problems disappear with one simple transaction, and nobody else ever has to know that you are a complete financial failure. I kept my hands folded in my lap. That sounds incredibly generous, I said, keeping my tone flat. But men in your line of work do not hand out six-figure checks out of the goodness of their hearts. What is the catch? Andre chuckled, glancing at Whitney as if I had just said something adorable. It is not a catch, Blair. It is standard business practice. I am offering you a highly strategic partnership. He reached into his expensive leather briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder. He slid it across the marble table toward me. In exchange for the $200,000 cash injection to save your family, Standing My Investment Fund will acquire a 40% equity stake in your data company. We will take over operational management and absorb your client list. You get to keep your vanity title as founder, but my firm will steer the ship. It is a win for everyone. You get the cash you desperately need, and I get a tax write-off project. I did not touch the folder. I just stared at the stark white paper peeking out from the edges. The unadulterated predatory nature of his offer was absolutely staggering. Andre genuinely believed he was cornering a desperate failing entrepreneur. He thought he was spending a measly $200,000 to casually acquire nearly half of an artificial intelligence auditing firm actively generating hundreds of millions in revenue. It was the most arrogant, uninformed corporate acquisition attempt I had ever witnessed in my professional career. But as I sat there analyzing his offer, a secondary, darker realization hit me. Andre was not doing this to help Whitney. He was doing this because his own investment fund was failing. My team had already flagged his firm for severe financial instability. Andre was desperately trying to acquire legitimate technology assets to pad his fraudulent portfolio before his own investors realized his fund was an empty shell. He needed my company to save his own skin, and he was using my sister's wedding as emotional leverage to steal it. I looked from the folder up to Andres' smug, expectant face. He truly thought he had me completely trapped. He thought I was so starved for my parents' approval that I would blindly sign away my life's work just to buy a seat at their toxic table. Whitney watched me with a tight, triumphant smile, fully believing her brilliant fiancé had just masterfully conquered her annoying older sister. The silence stretched out between us, as they waited for me to break down in tears of gratitude and reach for a pen. I slowly reached out and placed my index finger on the edge of the manila folder. I tapped it once, a light dismissive sound against the hard table. It is a fascinating proposal, Andre, I said, maintaining my flat, unreadable tone. You are offering to buy a 40% equity stake in a company you clearly have not done a single hour of due diligence on. Andre scoffed, shifting his weight. I do not need to do deep due diligence on a struggling vanity project, Blair. I know the market. I know what small data firms pull in. I am offering you a lifeline. You should be thanking me. Whitney nodded vigorously. Seriously, Blair, she chimed in, her voice shrill with impatience. You are being completely irrational. Andre is doing you a massive favor. If you do not take this deal, Mom and Dad are going to cut you off forever. You will not have a family anymore. Just sign the papers and stop being so difficult. I ignored my sister entirely and kept my eyes locked on Andre. You see, the problem with assuming you are the smartest person in the room is that you eventually stop checking your blind spots, I said. If you had run even a basic background check on my corporate entity, you would know that 40% of my company cannot be purchased for $200,000. In fact, $200,000 would not even cover the annual catering budget for my executive floor. Andre let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Right. Sure it would. Look, we all know you like to play the independent boss lady, but the jig is up. I am looking at your clothes. I saw the car you drove to the house. You are barely scraping by. Do not try to hustle a fund manager. It is embarrassing. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp expression that made Whitney shift uncomfortably in her seat. The car is a rental I use for family events because my actual vehicles attract too much attention, I explained smoothly. The clothes are cashmere custom tailored in Milan. They lack logos because I do not need to broadcast my net worth to insecure people. And as for my company, we just closed a $60 million auditing contract with the federal government. My firm is valued at just over $400 million. So no, Andre. I will not be selling you nearly half of it for the price of a mid-tier sports car. Andre's mocking smile vanished instantly. His posture stiffened, and a flash of genuine uncertainty crossed his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could form a cohesive sentence, the waiter arrived at our table holding a small black tray. "Excuse me, sir," the waiter said, looking highly apologetic as he addressed Andre. "I am so sorry, but your card was declined. I tried running it twice, but the terminal keeps rejecting it. Do you have another form of payment for the coffees?" The timing was so absolutely perfect that I almost laughed out loud. The great wealthy fund manager, the man who had just offered to buy my company to save my family from ruin, could not even clear a $40 tab for 3 lattes and a pastry. Whitney gasped, her cheeks flushing bright red. She looked from the waiter to Andre, pure panic setting in. "Andre, what is he talking about?" she hissed. "That is your premium black card. It has no limit." Andre snatched the card off the tray, his hands visibly shaking. "There is obviously a mistake with their machine." He snapped at the waiter, his voice tight with embarrassment. "Run it again. Or the fraud alert got tripped because I have been traveling. It happens all the time with accounts this large." The waiter looked deeply uncomfortable. "Sir, the error code specifically said insufficient funds. I cannot run it again." I watched the facade crack right down the middle. Andre was sweating now, frantically pulling out his phone to check his banking app, desperately trying to hide the screen from Whitney. He was supposed to be the savior of the family, the billionaire marrying the golden child, and he had just been publicly humiliated over a coffee bill. I reached into my plain gray sweater, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and placed it on the waiter's tray. "Keep the change," I said softly. The waiter nodded gratefully and hurried away. I turned my attention back to the golden couple. Andre was still staring at his phone, his face pale. Whitney looked like she was about to cry or scream, caught between confusion and deep social embarrassment. "You know, Andre," I said, standing up from the table, "for a man who claims to manage serious capital, you seem to have some very immediate liquidity issues. It makes me wonder what exactly your investment fund is actually holding. If I had to guess, I would say it is mostly air and false promises, which explains why you are so desperate to acquire legitimate tech assets for pennies. You need my company to validate your fraudulent portfolio." Andre finally looked up, pure venom in his eyes. "You do not know what you are talking about," he snarled, dropping the polite executive act completely. "I know exactly what I'm talking about," I countered, my voice icy. "My company audits financial fraud for a living. I see men like you every single day. Men who build their entire identities on debt and leverage, praying the market does not turn before they can secure their next mark. You are not marrying into this family because you love Whitney. You are marrying her because you think Richard is wealthy, and you need his money to save your failing fund. And Richard is thrilled because he thinks you are going to bail out his bankrupt import business. It is a match made in financial heaven. Two con artists trying to scam each other." Whitney stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Shut up, Blair!" she shrieked, no longer caring who heard her in the quiet cafe. "You are lying. You are just jealous. Andre is incredibly successful. Our wedding is going to be perfect. You are just a bitter, lonely liar." I looked at my sister, feeling a profound sense of pity mixed with absolute detachment. She was so desperate to maintain her illusion of perfection that she was willing to marry a fraud just to keep the country club narrative alive. "I am not the one lying, Whitney," I said softly. "Have a lovely wedding. I hope the check from Mom and Dad clears, though given the circumstances, I highly doubt it will." I turned and walked toward the cafe exit, leaving the manila folder sitting untouched on the table. I did not look back as I pushed through the glass doors and stepped out into the bustling city street. The encounter had confirmed everything my analysts had found. Andre was broke, Richard was broke, and the entire family was circling the drain, desperately clinging to a $200,000 party they could not afford. The trap was fully set. They had tried to bait me with false generosity and emotional manipulation. But they had failed to realize that I was the one holding the net. Now it was time to find out exactly how deep the rot in my family truly went. I pulled out my phone and sent a message to Nora. I needed her to start digging into the past. I wanted to know when the lies actually started. I walked into my penthouse, dropping my keys on the console. The adrenaline from the coffee shop encounter was slowly fading, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. My father had stood in his grand dining room and screamed that I owed him a massive debt. He acted as if my childhood existence was a heavy financial burden he graciously carried. For years, I had accepted that narrative. I had believed them when they said money was tight during my college years. I took on crushing student loans and worked overnight shifts just to pay for textbooks while my parents supposedly weathered a corporate recession. Seeing Andre sweat over a declined credit card shifted my perspective entirely. Liars always project their own sins onto their targets. If Richard was currently running a massive financial con to save his sinking suburban ship, what else had he faked? I needed to know exactly how far back the financial abuse went. I stepped into my office and tapped the screen to wake up my command center. Silas and Nora were already online, their status indicators glowing green. I initiated a secure video conference. Their faces appeared on my monitors. "We have a new objective," I said, bypassing any greetings. "I need to pivot the investigation away from their current bankruptcy and look backward. Go back exactly 10 years. I want a complete forensic sweep of my parents' financial footprint from the moment I turned 18 until I graduated college." Nora raised an eyebrow, her fingers flying across her keyboard. "That is a deep dive into legacy systems. Most of those tax returns and bank statements will be archived. Are we looking for something specific?" I leaned forward on the desk. "My father claims I owe this family a massive debt for my upbringing. But when I went to college, he told me the import business was suffering a severe cash flow crisis. He said they could not spare a single dollar for my tuition. I was forced to take out high-interest student loans and work 3 jobs to survive. Yet 2 years later, when Whitney started college, they magically found the cash to buy her a brand new Porsche and fund her elite sorority lifestyle. I want to know where that money came from. Track every asset transfer, every hidden account, and every sudden influx of capital during that specific timeline." Silas nodded, his eyes scanning the data streams on his glasses, adjusting the artificial intelligence parameters now. "I am instructing the algorithm to look for custodial accounts, hidden equity transfers, and anything attached to your social security number that you did not personally authorize." The monitors shifted from current market data to historical financial records. My software began scraping the digital archives of regional banks, cross-referencing tax filings with property records. I watched the code cascade down the large glowing screens. As the data compiled, my mind drifted back to my sophomore year of college. I remembered sitting in the campus library crying over a past due tuition notice. I had called my father begging for a small loan just to keep my classes. He had given me a harsh lecture about responsibility, claiming he and my mother were barely keeping their own heads above water. He told me to grow up and figure it out. I had sold my laptop and taken a 3rd job waiting tables to make the payment. All while I was starving, they were maintaining their country club memberships and planning Whitney's Sweet 16 party. The cruelty was not just emotional, it was systemic, and I was finally going to prove it. "Boss, you need to look at this," Nora said, breaking the silence in the office. Her voice had lost its usual professional detachment. It sounded strained. She pushed a digitized document to my central screen. It was an ancient bank statement from a financial institution that had since been absorbed by a larger conglomerate. "What am I looking at?" I asked, my eyes scanning the faded black and white text. "It is a generational wealth transfer," Silas answered, pulling up the corresponding legal documents. "We ran a trace on your social security number across all inactive custodial accounts. We found a highly restricted trust fund." "A trust fund," I repeated, feeling a sudden chill in the room. "I do not have a trust fund," "You did," Nora corrected softly. "The documents show it was established 25 years ago by your paternal grandmother. She bypassed your father entirely and left the money in a direct trust meant exclusively for your college education and early adulthood expenses. The principal amount was exactly $150,000. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding against my ribs. My grandmother had died when I was 8 years old. I barely remembered her, but I remembered she always used to slip me extra candies when my mother was not looking. She had left me a future. She had made sure I would be safe. "Where is the money now?" I asked, though a sickening feeling in my gut already told me the answer. Silas pulled up a secondary transaction log highlighting a series of massive withdrawals. The trust was structured to unlock the week you turned 18. But because you were a dependent living under their roof, your father retained limited custodial oversight to assist with the transfer of funds. Instead of transferring the money to you, Richard and Barbara systematically drained the entire account. I watched the dates on the screen align with my darkest memories. The first major withdrawal was for $40,000. It happened the exact same week my father told me I had to take out my first student loan. "Trace the routing numbers on those withdrawals right now," I commanded. "Where exactly did my college fund go?" Nora typed furiously. "The money was not used to save the import business. It was routed directly into Richard and Barbara's joint personal checking account. From there, it was dispersed across multiple luxury purchases. They used $20,000 to pay off a country club initiation fee. They spent $15,000 on a luxury vacation to the Bahamas. And the largest withdrawal," Silas added, pushing the final piece of evidence to my screen. "Exactly $80,000 was withdrawn the month before Whitney started college. The funds were wired directly to a luxury auto dealership to purchase a brand new Porsche Macan." I sat perfectly still. The silence in my penthouse was absolute. The debt my father screamed about, the financial burden he claimed I was, it was all a projection. They did not just favor Whitney over me. They actively stole my future to fund her unearned luxury. They watched me starve, watched me drown in student debt while using my inheritance to buy sports cars and country club status. They were not just toxic parents. They were actual thieves. They had looked me in the eye for a decade and lied with absolute impunity. The magnitude of their betrayal cemented my resolve completely. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the cool steel desk. I did not feel any sorrow. I felt pure, unadulterated vengeance burning in my veins. "Prepare the legal files," I told my team. "We are going to destroy them all today." Nora did not hesitate. The sound of her rapid typing filled the audio channel as she immediately began compiling the raw data into encrypted court-admissible formats. But as I stared at the screen displaying the empty balance of my stolen trust fund, a glaring logistical question suddenly hit me. If the trust automatically unlocked on my 18th birthday, the bank would have required my direct authorization to release those funds. My father had limited custodial oversight, but he could not simply liquidate a protected account without my explicit notarized consent. I had never stepped foot inside that bank. I had never seen these documents. "Pull up the original withdrawal slips," I commanded, leaning closer to the high-resolution monitor. "Retrieve the digital scans of the physical paperwork submitted to the bank 10 years ago. I want to see exactly how they bypassed the security protocols." Silas ran a bypass through the bank's legacy archives. It took him less than 3 minutes to retrieve the scanned digital files. He pushed them to my center screen. I opened the first document, a request for a $40,000 wire transfer dated exactly 1 week after my 18th birthday. I scrolled down to the bottom of the page, my eyes locking onto the signature line. There, written in blue ink, was my name. I stared at the cursive letters. It was not my handwriting. The loops were too wide, the slant too aggressive. It was a sloppy, hurried attempt to mimic my signature. But I recognized the handwriting instantly. The sharp angle of the letter B and the aggressive cross of the letter T were unmistakable. It was my mother. Barbara had forged my signature. "Pull up the rest of them," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Silas populated the screen with half a dozen more withdrawal slips. Every single one bore the same forged signature. My parents had not just found a legal loophole to redirect my inheritance. They had actively committed grand larceny and felony forgery. They had walked into a federally insured bank, presented falsified documents, and systematically drained $150,000 of my money. Look at the secondary disbursements, Nora chimed in, highlighting a series of smaller yet significant transactions that occurred alongside the Porsche purchase. We know $80,000 went to the luxury car dealership for Whitney's vehicle, but the remaining $30,000 was funneled into a highly specific set of recurring payments. I followed her digital highlighted trail. The money had been wired to the national headquarters of an elite, highly exclusive collegiate sorority. It was the exact same sorority Whitney had joined during her freshman year. The payments covered her exorbitant membership dues, luxury housing fees, mandatory gala sponsorships, and high-end networking events. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. Whitney's entire golden child persona was completely manufactured using my stolen inheritance. My parents had quite literally bought her social status. They purchased her popularity, her elite connections, and her unearned confidence using the exact funds my grandmother had set aside to protect my future. Whitney had paraded around her university dripping in designer clothes and driving a brand new sports car, believing she was inherently superior. She had absolutely no idea her entire existence was subsidized by my stolen college tuition. Or maybe she did know. Given how tightly knit their web of lies was, nothing would surprise me anymore. I sat back in my chair, absorbing the sheer, unadulterated sociopathy of my parents. For 10 years, they had looked me directly in the eyes while I struggled to survive. They watched me work overnight shifts, exhaust myself to the point of physical collapse, and take on predatory student loans just to afford basic textbooks. Whenever I asked for help, they called me a burden. They lectured me about financial responsibility. They actively humiliated me at family gatherings for wearing cheap clothes and driving an old sedan. Every single insult, every cruel comparison to Whitney, every time my father screamed that I owed him a debt, they were projecting their own criminal guilt onto me. They needed me to feel small, desperate, and insecure, so I would never have the confidence to question them or look into my own financial history. They kept me fighting for scraps of their approval, so I would never realize they had stolen my feast. They are not just toxic parents, I said aloud, the cold reality settling deep into my bones. They are actual thieves. Yes, they are, Silas agreed over the comms, his tone reflecting my own icy anger. And in the state of Connecticut, the statute of limitations for bank fraud and grand larceny of this scale is highly dependent on the date of discovery. Because they actively concealed the trust fund and you just uncovered the forged documents today, a prosecutor would have a field day with this. Package the forged signatures, I instructed Nora. Cross-reference them against verified samples of Barbara's handwriting from her public real estate filings and tax documents. I want a side-by-side forensic comparison that leaves absolutely zero room for plausible deniability. I want the paper trail showing the exact flow of funds from my trust account to the Porsche dealership and the sorority headquarters. Make it airtight. Consider it done, Nora replied, the sound of her rapid typing resuming. What is the play here, Blair? Are we sending this straight to the authorities? Not yet, I said, a dark smile forming on my lips. If I hand this to the police right now, they get arrested, but they get to play the victims. They will spin a story about making a mistake to save the family business. They will try to manipulate the extended family into paying their legal fees. I am not going to give them the luxury of controlling the narrative. I stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window of my penthouse, looking out over the sleeping city. The sky was just beginning to lighten, signaling the start of a new day. My parents were currently panicking over their imminent bankruptcy and trying to scam Andre Washington to save their mansion. They thought they were the smartest predators in the jungle. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They had absolutely no idea that I held the keys to their complete and total destruction. I had the evidence of their bankruptcy, their fraudulent investment proposals, and now irrefutable proof of their felony grand larceny. I held enough ammunition to dismantle their entire lives, seize their assets, and send them to federal prison. Lock down the file, I told Silas and Nora. Encrypt the dossier and prepare it for immediate distribution. We are moving to the next phase of the operation. I am going to let them put on their fancy clothes, rent their expensive venue, and invite their high society guests. And then I am going to burn their entire suburban facade to the absolute ground." The sun had risen over the city when I ended the call. I felt no fatigue. The revelation of my parents' theft was a powerful stimulant. I showered and dressed in a tailored charcoal suit. Today was a regular workday for me, but it was also the day I triggered the collapse of Richard and Barbara's fraudulent empire. I arrived at my headquarters at 8. My private office was a glass fortress overlooking the financial district. Sitting at my desk, I bypassed my standard briefings and opened the encrypted dossier. It was a masterpiece of forensic accounting. Every live fabricated revenue stream and forged signature was documented and backed by irrefutable digital evidence. I was not waiting for a dramatic confrontation to strike. I wanted the wheels of justice grinding them into dust long before I looked them in the eye again. I opened a secure browser and navigated directly to the whistleblower portal of the Securities and Exchange Commission. Richard had crossed a massive federal line when he drafted those fraudulent investment proposals targeting Andre Washington's fund. Seeking capital using falsified corporate tax returns and fake inventory manifests constituted severe federal wire fraud and securities manipulation. I filled out the anonymous submission forms with clinical precision. I uploaded the draft contracts, the ledgers showing the hidden bankruptcies, and the fake profit statements Richard had created to lure the Atlanta-based investors. I did not leave a single gap for a defense attorney to exploit. I handed the federal investigators a fully completed puzzle. The Federal Commission moves quite methodically, but when presented with an airtight case involving corporate fraud, they lock their jaws and never let go. Richard was about to be placed under a microscope that would strip him of everything he owned. But federal investigations take time, and I wanted immediate localized destruction. I needed the ground to collapse beneath their feet this very week. I picked up my phone and dialed Silas. "The federal package is submitted," I said. "Now let us drop the hammer on his commercial lenders, distribute the packets to the fraud departments of his 3 primary banks." Silas chuckled, the sound transmitting crisply over the encrypted line. "Routing them now. I am sending the data straight to the senior risk analysts. Once they see that the collateral Richard used to secure his business loans is completely fabricated, they are going to panic. When a business takes out massive commercial loans, those loans are bound by debt covenants. If the bank discovers that the borrower lied about their assets, the bank can trigger an acceleration clause. This means the entire balance of the loan becomes due immediately. Richard owed millions. He did not even have the cash to pay for his morning coffee without borrowing it from a new credit card. Within 48 hours, the risk management teams at his banks would review our anonymous audit. They would independently verify the discrepancies. They would immediately freeze all of his active corporate accounts to prevent capital flight. And then they would initiate aggressive collection protocols. The quiet foreclosure on the Connecticut mansion would be fast-tracked into an active, merciless seizure. I leaned back in my chair and watched the digital delivery confirmations pop up on my screen. The trap was sprung. The invisible tripwires were now active. My parents were currently walking around their sprawling suburban estate, completely oblivious to the fact that their financial oxygen had just been permanently cut off. I spent the rest of the day conducting my actual business. I led a board meeting, finalized a lucrative software licensing deal with a major healthcare provider, and reviewed my own flawless profit margins. The contrast between my reality and my parents' delusion was staggering. They had spent my entire life telling me I was a failure because I did not conform to their superficial standards. Yet here I was, commanding a highly profitable tech company, while they were essentially high-end squatters waiting to be evicted. By late afternoon, I checked my personal phone. The group chat my mother had created for the wedding was buzzing with aggressive activity. Barbara was sending out passive-aggressive updates clearly intended to shame me into submission. She posted a picture of an intricate floral centerpiece with a caption complaining about how hard it was to secure premium vendors when certain family members refused to pull their weight. Whitney replied with heart emojis, adding that her perfect day would happen no matter who tried to ruin it. I read their messages and felt a genuine, terrifying calm. They were so deeply entrenched in their own narcissism that they could not sense the impending disaster. They believed their aggressive social pressure was working. They thought my silence meant I was sitting in my apartment crying, calculating how to secure a $200,000 loan to buy back their affection. They had absolutely no idea that I had spent the morning dismantling their entire existence. The banks were already analyzing the fraud. The federal investigators were assigning case numbers to the dossier. The machinery of their destruction was fully operational. I locked my phone screen, slipped it into my blazer pocket, and turned my attention back to the massive panoramic view of the city. I was going to let them enjoy their ignorance for just a few more days. I wanted them to reach the absolute height of their arrogance before I tore it all down. I needed them to walk into their rehearsal dinner feeling like royalty. I needed them to stand in front of the wealthy Washington family, boasting about their fake empire, completely unaware that the floorboards had already been removed. I took a deep breath, savoring the very quiet power of knowing exactly how the story was going to end. The execution was completely flawless, and the countdown had officially begun. I would ensure that every single lie they had ever told would be exposed in the harshest light possible. While I sat in my penthouse orchestrating their legal ruin, Barbara and Whitney were busy accelerating their own financial demise. I knew this because Nora had placed a tracker on the few remaining active credit lines tied to Richard's name. The alerts began lighting up my secondary monitor by Tuesday morning. It was a spectacular display of absolute financial recklessness. They were swiping credit cards that were already suffocating under maximum limits, utilizing emergency overdraft protections, and pulling from high-interest personal loans just to fund the superficial details of the Lake Como wedding. My screen flagged a $25,000 charge at an elite yacht charter company based in Italy. Whitney had apparently decided that a simple reception was not enough. She needed a sunset cruise on the lake for the Washington family. Less than an hour later, another alert popped up. $15,000 was charged to a boutique floral designer in New York, known for importing rare orchids. They were literally buying flowers, with money that did not exist, using accounts that were hours away from being frozen by the federal fraud investigators. I pulled up Facebook on my phone to see the public-facing side of their spending spree. Barbara was treating her social media feed like a live broadcast of her own delusion. She had uploaded a photo album titled Wedding Preparation with My Beautiful Girl. The pictures showed Whitney and Barbara sipping champagne in a luxury bridal suite, surrounded by imported silk fabrics and towering floral arrangements. They looked incredibly smug, radiating the kind of aggressive entitlement that only comes from people who think they are completely untouchable. But the captions truly showcased Barbara's toxic psychology. She was not just celebrating a wedding, she was actively using the event to publicly shame me. Underneath a photo of Whitney holding a crystal glass, Barbara wrote a vicious paragraph. She proclaimed how blessed she was to have a daughter who understood family loyalty. Then came the targeted attack. I am so grateful to be surrounded by people who uplift us. It is incredibly sad when you have to cut toxic poor relatives out of your perfect lives because they are too consumed by jealousy to celebrate your success. Good riddance to the dead weight. We are moving forward with only the best people. The comment section was a cesspool of enabling behavior. Distant aunts and country club acquaintances chimed in with supportive messages praising Barbara for her strength and congratulating Whitney on her upcoming nuptials. They all offered vague condolences about how hard it must be to deal with a selfish family member. Not a single one of them knew that the woman they were praising was actively committing bank fraud to pay for the champagne she was holding in the photograph. I took screenshots of every single post and forwarded them to my legal team. Barbara's digital gloating was not just insulting, it was highly incriminating. She was publicly documenting her extravagant spending while her husband was actively defaulting on millions of dollars in commercial loans. The bankruptcy courts would view these Facebook updates as irrefutable evidence of financial mismanagement and asset concealment. She was handing the federal prosecutors a beautifully curated photo album of her own crimes. Whitney was equally unhinged on her own platforms. She posted a video of herself trying on diamond tiaras, complaining loudly to the camera about the stress of dealing with unsupportive people who tried to ruin her joy. She tagged Andre in every post, desperately reinforcing the narrative that they were the ultimate power couple. She was clinging to the illusion of the Washington family wealth, blind to the fact that she was marrying into a sinking ship. I watched the dance of the delusional play out in real time. It was fascinating. When cornered by failure, my family did not reflect or pull back. They doubled down on the facade. They believed that if they just projected enough wealth, if they just bought enough rare orchids and chartered enough yachts, reality would somehow bend to accommodate their lies. They thought their aggressive confidence would shield them from the mathematical truth of their empty bank accounts. Nora sent me a direct message over our encrypted channel. She had been monitoring the transaction logs alongside me. The bank just approved the yacht charter charge, she wrote. But it pushed Richard's debt-to-income ratio past the critical threshold. The automated risk management system at his primary lender just flagged the account for manual review. Let them review it, I replied, my fingers flying across the keyboard. The forensic packet we sent them yesterday will be sitting right at the top of their queue. Once a human analyst looks at those forged inventory manifests, the spending spree is officially over. It was almost tragic how easily they could have avoided this absolute destruction. If they had simply left me alone, if they had not demanded $200,000, if they had not stolen my college fund, they might have been able to quietly declare bankruptcy and salvage some shred of their dignity. But their greed and relentless need to humiliate me had sealed their fate. They had built a spectacular house of cards, and they were currently throwing a party on the roof while striking matches. I closed the social media applications and turned my attention back to the broader strategy. The floral arrangements were booked. The yachts were chartered. The toxic Facebook posts were published for the entire world to see. They had fully committed to the charade. I just needed to wait for the final structural support to give way. The rehearsal dinner was approaching rapidly, and I would let them walk into that upscale restaurant, feeling like absolute royalty. I wanted them surrounded by the people they wanted to impress the most. The higher they climbed their pedestal of lies, the more devastating the impact would be when I shattered the glass. While my parents were busy orchestrating their financial suicide on social media, I turned my attention to the other side of this fraudulent equation. My family was a lost cause, but Andre Washington was an entirely different species of predator. He had sat at my parents' dining table and mocked my sedan. He had offered to buy my multi-million-dollar artificial intelligence firm for pennies, believing I was a desperate amateur. It was time to see exactly what kind of empire the great Atlanta fund manager was actually running. I initiated another encrypted video call with Silas and Nora. We are shifting targets, I announced. I want a complete forensic teardown of Andre Washington and his investment fund. I want to see his ledger. Nora smiled, her fingers dancing across her keyboard. I ran a preliminary scrape on Washington Capital Partners yesterday. On the surface, it looks like a standard boutique private equity firm. Fancy website, premium Atlanta high-rise offices, and a board filled with his old money relatives. But when you look at their actual regulatory filings, the math gets fuzzy. Fuzzy is not a word we accept in data analysis, I replied. Dig into the asset allocation. Where is their capital actually parked? Silas took over the screen, projecting a complex web of corporate entities onto my monitor. That is the thing, Blair. The capital is not parked anywhere, it is constantly moving. Andre is operating a sophisticated shell game. He creates secondary limited liability companies, values them internally at absurdly inflated numbers, and then uses those fake valuations to secure commercial loans. He takes the loan money to pay dividends to his early investors, maintaining the illusion of returns. He is running a textbook Ponzi scheme, I said, the magnitude of his audacity washing over me. Exactly, Nora chimed in. But the scheme is collapsing. His early investors are asking for their principal back, and commercial lenders are tightening their requirements. He desperately needs a legitimate tangible asset to anchor his portfolio before federal regulators notice the massive gaps in his balance sheets. I stared at the data mapping out Andre's imminent ruin. This explained why he was so desperate to acquire my company during our coffee shop meeting. He thought he was intimidating a struggling tech founder into handing over a legitimate asset to prop up his failing fund. When I rejected him, he pivoted entirely to his backup plan. Pull up the draft investment proposals my father sent to Andre, I ordered. The ones Richard drafted to pitch his bankrupt import business. Silas isolated the files next to Andre's financial web. Look closely at how Andre responded to those drafts, Silas pointed out, highlighting a series of email exchanges. Andre did not even conduct a basic audit of your father's company. He just accepted the falsified revenue numbers at face value. A legitimate fund manager would demand a full forensic review before committing a single dollar. But Andre rushed the letter of intent. Why would he rush a bad deal? I asked, connecting the final dots. Because he does not care if the import business is actually profitable, Nora explained, bringing up a federal grant application form bearing Andre's signature. He is using your father's falsified corporate tax returns to apply for massive federal business development grants. He is packaging Richard's failing company into a portfolio of distressed assets and pitching it to the government as a revitalization project. If the grant gets approved, Andre pockets the federal money, uses it to pay off his angry investors, and lets your father's business quietly dissolve. That is federal wire fraud, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. He is actively committing federal wire fraud. It is more than just wire fraud, Silas corrected. By falsifying asset valuations and transmitting those documents across state lines to secure government funds, he is triggering a cascade of federal statutes. If he signs the execution papers on this deal, he is looking at a mandatory minimum sentence in a federal penitentiary. The absolute poetic justice of the situation was overwhelming. I leaned back in my chair and let out a genuine laugh. It was a masterpiece of mutual deception. Richard and Barbara were desperately trying to scam the wealthy Washington family to save their foreclosed mansion and bankrupt import business. Meanwhile, Andre Washington was trying to scam Richard to secure fake collateral to save his fraudulent investment fund and stay out of federal prison. Both sides were absolute parasites convinced they had found the perfect, wealthy host to drain. They were two sinking ships trying to use each other as a life raft. Package all of it. I commanded my team, my voice sharp. I want Andre's shell company's falsified loan applications, federal grant submissions, and fake asset ledgers compiled into a single, devastating dossier. Make it irrefutable. I want the paper trail so clean a federal prosecutor could secure an indictment in 10 minutes. Nora nodded, compiling the raw data. Where is this packet going? The authorities. No, I replied, a cold smile spreading across my face. The authorities will get their turn. But first, I am going to deliver this information personally. Andre loves to brag about his family legacy and elite status. He loves to humiliate people in front of an audience. I am giving him the exact audience he deserves. The rehearsal dinner was just 2 days away. My parents and Andre had spent the entire week building a towering monument to their own vanity. I now possessed the precise tools required to demolish it completely. The final piece of ammunition was securely loaded into the chamber. I locked my screens and stood up, feeling a surge of pure anticipation. The trap was flawless, and the execution was going to be an absolute bloodbath. I arrived at my office on Thursday morning to find a thick, cream-colored envelope resting precisely in the center of my desk. My assistant had placed it there, recognizing the heavy, expensive cardstock and the elaborate gold foil embossing. It was the formal invitation to Whitney and Andre's rehearsal dinner. I picked it up, feeling the substantial weight of the paper. They had spared absolutely no expense on the stationery, a darkly comedic detail considering the vendors who produced these invitations were likely fighting to collect their payments right now. I broke the wax seal and slid the invitation out. It was an opulent piece of marketing inviting me to join the joining of two legacy families at the most exclusive members-only dining club in the city. The event was scheduled for Friday evening, but it was not the printed text that caught my attention. It was the handwritten note tucked inside, penned by my father. I pulled out the smaller card. The handwriting was aggressive and sharp, just like the man himself. Blair, you have exactly 48 hours left to wire the funds. In the meantime, I am inviting you to the rehearsal dinner. Come see what true success looks like. See what real wealth and family loyalty can achieve. Look at the people in that room and feel ashamed of the pathetic, isolated life you have chosen. This is your final chance to apologize to Andre and earn your seat at the table. Do not embarrass us again. I read the note twice, letting the sheer suffocating arrogance of his words wash over me. My father genuinely believed he was sitting on a throne looking down at a peasant. He was inviting me to witness his masterpiece, fully expecting me to arrive trembling with inadequacy and begging for forgiveness. I dropped the note onto my desk and laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound that echoed in the quiet office. They wanted an audience. They wanted a public spectacle to validate their delusions. They had absolutely no idea they had just handed me the perfect venue to execute their total destruction. I picked up my phone and dialed my lead investigator. Nora, I said, leaning back in my chair. The final stage is set. We are going to the rehearsal dinner tomorrow night. I need the dossiers printed, bound, and securely packaged. I want hard copies of everything. The bank fraud, the forged trust fund documents, Andre's shell companies, the impending federal indictments. Understood, boss, Nora replied, the sound of a high-speed printer already whirring in the background. Do you need me to arrange secondary legal counsel to be present? No, I said. I will handle the execution personally, but I need you to double-check the status of the commercial loan acceleration. I want to make sure the bank is moving forward with the property seizure. Silas joined the line. I am tracking the automated systems now, he confirmed. The bank's risk management team escalated the file this morning. They initiated the acceleration clause on Richard's primary business loans. The foreclosure proceedings on the Connecticut mansion have moved from preliminary to active status. The bank officials are scheduled to arrive at the property to serve the official lockout notices at exactly 8 in the morning on Saturday. Perfect, I replied. I will deliver the news to them a few hours early. The rest of the day was a blur of high-level corporate operations, but my mind was laser-focused on Friday night. I left the office early and directed my driver to take me to the luxury shopping district. If my family wanted to play a game of appearances, I was going to beat them at their own game. I was not going to show up in the plain, understated clothes I usually wore around them. I was going to arrive looking exactly like the apex predator I was. I walked into an exclusive designer boutique, bypassing the racks of typical evening wear. I selected a custom-tailored, deep crimson suit. It was sharp-structured and radiated absolute authority. I paired it with a silk blouse and a pair of stilettos that commanded attention. I did not want to look like a desperate sister seeking approval. I wanted to look like a corporate executioner. Friday evening arrived with a heavy, oppressive cold. The city streets were slick with rain as my driver navigated toward the exclusive dining club. I sat in the back of my imported luxury vehicle, the leather seat cold against my hands. Resting on my lap was a sleek black leather portfolio case. Inside were the bound dossiers, the financial death warrants for both my family and Andre Washington. I ran my fingers over the smooth leather, feeling a strange sense of absolute calm. For 33 years I had navigated the emotional minefield of my family. I had endured the subtle jabs, the overt insults, and the constant crushing expectation that I would eventually fail. They had used my supposed inadequacy as the foundation for their own fragile egos. They had stolen my future to fund their facade. Tonight I was tearing that foundation down to the bedrock. As the car pulled up to the grand entrance of the dining club, I could see the flashing lights of the valet stand and the steady stream of wealthy guests arriving. The Washington family had likely rented out the entire top floor, sparing no expense to impress their high society peers. My driver opened the door, and I stepped out onto the wet pavement. The air was freezing, but I barely felt it. I adjusted the collar of my crimson suit and gripped the leather portfolio tightly in my right hand. I was not walking into a celebration. I was walking into an active crime scene, and I was holding the evidence. I approached the heavy glass doors, my heels clicking rhythmically against the stone. The doorman pulled the door open, greeting me with a practiced nod. I stepped into the warm, opulent lobby, ready to deliver my wedding gift. The dining club was a masterpiece of old-world architecture, situated in a historic building overlooking the city park. The moment I handed my coat to the attendant, the atmosphere of forced exclusivity washed over me. Crystal chandeliers dripped from vaulted ceilings, casting a warm golden glow over the dark mahogany paneling and plush velvet seating. The air hummed with the low, measured conversations of the city's elite, accompanied by the clinking of fine crystal and silver. I paused at the entrance to the private dining room my parents had secured. The heavy double doors were open, revealing the lavish rehearsal dinner already underway. The room was breathtakingly expensive, decorated with cascading white orchids that I knew cost $15,000 of non-existent money. Waiters in crisp white jackets glided silently between tables pouring vintage champagne. It was the perfect stage for their grand illusion. Before making my entrance, I took a moment to observe the key players. In the center of the room, my parents, Richard and Barbara, were holding court with Andre's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Washington. The physical contrast between the two couples was fascinating. The Washingtons exuded the quiet, effortless confidence of generational wealth. Mr. Washington stood tall, wearing a bespoke suit that lacked any visible branding but screamed money. Mrs. Washington looked elegant in understated jewelry, her posture relaxed but commanding. My parents, on the other hand, were performing. They were trying entirely too hard. Barbara was dripping in diamonds, her laughter too loud, her gestures too broad. She kept touching Mrs. Washington's arm in a desperate attempt to establish intimacy. Richard was puffing his chest, dominating the conversation with aggressive hand gestures, clearly trying to project the image of a titan of industry. They looked like actors who had memorized their lines, but did not understand the characters they were playing. I caught fragments of their conversation over the ambient noise. Richard was boasting loudly. "We are actually exploring a major expansion into the European markets," he declared, swirling his champagne. "It is a complex merger, of course, but the preliminary projections are outstanding. The synergy between our import logistics and the new European partners will redefine the supply chain." Mr. Washington nodded politely, though his eyes remained sharp and assessing. "That sounds ambitious, Richard," he replied smoothly. "Expanding into Europe requires significant capital reserves, especially given the current regulatory climate. I imagine your liquidity must be exceptionally strong to navigate those waters." "Oh, absolutely," Barbara chimed in quickly, her voice high and breathless. "Richard is a master at capital management. We are very conservative with our primary assets, but we always ensure the business has what it needs to thrive. The corporate merger is practically finalized. We are just waiting for the ink to dry on the final contracts." I listened to them spin their elaborate web of lies, feeling a strange mix of disgust and anticipation. They were standing there bragging about non-existent European mergers and vast capital reserves, while the commercial banks were literally preparing the foreclosure paperwork for their home. They were lying directly to the faces of the people they were desperately trying to scam. Nearby, Whitney and Andre were surrounded by a group of Atlanta socialites, likely cousins and family friends of the Washingtons. Whitney was glowing, playing the role of the blushing bride to absolute perfection. She was recounting the details of their upcoming Italian wedding, emphasizing the exclusivity of the Lake Como venue and the custom design of her gown. Andre stood beside her, his arm draped possessively over her waist, projecting the image of a wildly successful fund manager, securing his beautiful trophy wife. "They are a perfect match," I heard one of Andre's aunts say, smiling at the couple. "Your family must be so proud, Barbara. They truly represent the next generation of excellence." Barbara beamed, her chest swelling with pride. "They really do," she agreed enthusiastically. "We have always pushed our girls to achieve greatness, to understand the value of legacy. Whitney has exceeded all our expectations. She is the heart of this family." The sheer hypocrisy of her statement hung in the air. She was praising Whitney as the heart of the family, completely ignoring the fact that they had invited me tonight solely to humiliate me. They had demanded $200,000 stolen my trust fund and branded me a failure, all to prop up this exact moment. I adjusted my grip on the black leather portfolio. It was time to introduce reality to the rehearsal dinner. I smoothed the lapels of my crimson suit, feeling the sharp, structured lines of the jacket. I did not look like the scapegoat they remembered. I looked like an executive arriving to close a hostile takeover. I stepped through the double doors and walked into the private dining room. I did not hesitate. I did not shrink back. I moved with deliberate, measured steps, my heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor. The crimson suit stood out like a warning beacon against the sea of black tuxedos and pastel evening gowns. The conversation near the entrance faltered as I passed. Guests turned to look at me, their expressions shifting from polite curiosity to confusion. I ignored them all, keeping my eyes locked on the center of the room where my parents were still trying to impress the Washingtons. Whitney was the first to spot me. Her smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer panic. She grabbed Andre's arm, her fingers digging into his suit jacket. Andre turned, his eyes narrowing as he took in my appearance. He clearly did not expect me to show up looking like I owned the building. Barbara noticed the shift in her daughter's expression and turned her head. When she saw me approaching, the color completely drained from her face. She looked like she had just seen a ghost walk into her perfect party. Richard followed her gaze, his aggressive posture deflating for a fraction of a second before he quickly rearranged his features into a scowl of deep disapproval. I stopped about 10 feet away from their group, perfectly positioned in the center of the room. The silence spread outward from me like ripples in a pond, quickly silencing the entire rehearsal dinner. 50 guests turned to stare. The waiters paused mid-pour. The string quartet in the corner seemed to play a little softer. I held their attention, letting the tension build until the room was utterly quiet. I looked directly at my father, meeting his furious gaze with absolute chilling calm. The stage was finally set, and the audience was fully captivated. I took the final steps toward the head table. The heavy silence in the dining room amplified the sound of my heels striking the polished mahogany floor. The wealthy guests seated nearest to the aisle instinctively pulled their chairs back, parting like the Red Sea to let me pass. Every single eye in the room tracked my movement. Mr. and Mrs. Washington watched me with polite but intense curiosity, clearly unaware of the fierce psychological warfare playing out right in front of them. My father, however, quickly recovered from his initial shock. He puffed out his chest, stepping forward to block my direct path to the table. His face was rigid with forced authority, masking the absolute panic swimming in his eyes. "Blair," he said, his voice artificially deep and booming, meant to project paternal control to the wealthy onlookers. "I see you finally decided to join us. I hope you brought exactly what we discussed. It is never too late to make amends and honor your family obligations." Whitney stepped up beside him, crossing her arms defensively. She wore a stunning white silk gown that undoubtedly cost a fortune they did not possess. "I knew you would cave," she sneered, keeping her voice just low enough so the Washington family could not hear her venom. "You always fold when you realize nobody else wants you around. Just hand over the check so we can get back to my celebration. Do not make this weird." Andre stood just behind Whitney, adjusting his diamond cufflinks. "Good to see you finally acting like a responsible adult, Blair," he added, his tone dripping with his trademark condescension. "Like I told you at the coffee shop, funding this wedding is your only ticket back into polite society. Let us see the financial contribution." I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I looked at the three of them standing shoulder to shoulder, forming a unified wall of supreme arrogance. They were so thoroughly blinded by their own greed that they genuinely believed I had come to surrender. They thought the crimson suit was a desperate cry for attention, and the black leather portfolio in my hand was simply a carrying case for their unearned wealth. "I am not here to make amends," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent room. "And I am certainly not here to buy my way into a family that bases its love on financial extortion." "I received your invitation, Richard. You told me to come and see what true success looks like. You told me to look at the people in this room and feel ashamed of myself." My mother Barbara lunged forward from the side, her heavy diamond bracelets clinking loudly. She tried to grab my arm, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror. "Keep your voice down," she hissed through gritted teeth. "You are embarrassing us in front of the Washingtons. Give us the money and leave right now." I smoothly sidestepped her grasping hands. I stepped past my father and approached the center of the lavishly decorated table right where the Washingtons were seated. Mr. Washington tilted his head, his sharp eyes darting between my furious parents and my absolute composure. He could smell the incoming disaster. "I brought a wedding gift," I announced. I wanted to make sure it was delivered directly to the bride, the groom, and the brilliant mastermind who orchestrated this entire luxury affair. I unzipped the black leather portfolio. The soft rasp of the metal zipper sounded incredibly loud in the hushed dining room. I reached inside and withdrew a thick, heavy manila envelope. It was sealed with a bright red security stamp from one of the largest commercial banks in the country. I held it out for a fraction of a second, letting the anticipation peak before dropping it squarely onto the center of the table. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud, right next to an extravagant floral arrangement. Whitney snatched the envelope immediately. Her manicured fingers tore eagerly into the heavy paper, her eyes gleaming with raw greed. She fully expected to find a certified bank check for $200,000. She thought she had won the ultimate victory. Richard leaned over her shoulder, his breathing shallow and rapid. Barbara crowded in on the other side, her hands fluttering with nervous excitement. Even Andre took a step closer, eager to verify the financial tribute they had successfully bullied out of me. Whitney pulled the thick stack of legal documents from the envelope. She flipped to the very first page. I watched her perfectly curated expression freeze in real time. Her eyes scanned the bold, capitalized letters printed across the top of the official bank letterhead. The greed vanished from her face, instantly replaced by total, uncomprehending horror. "What is this?" Whitney whispered, her hands beginning to shake so violently that the papers rustled against each other. "This is not a check." Richard grabbed the documents from her hands. He stared at the front page, and I watched the literal life drain out of his face. His skin turned an ashen, sickly gray. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The aggressive, domineering patriarch was instantly reduced to a hollow, terrified shell. "What does it say?" Barbara demanded, trying to pull the papers toward her. "Richard, what did she give us?" I did not wait for him to find his voice. I decided to announce it to the entire room myself. "That is a notice of default and active foreclosure," I stated, my voice echoing off the mahogany walls. "Issued directly by your primary commercial lender, authorized at 4 o'clock this afternoon. The bank has officially accelerated your massive unpaid commercial loans. Your business accounts are permanently frozen. The Connecticut mansion you are currently using to impress your future in-laws will be seized and padlocked by bank officials at exactly 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. You are completely ruined, and everyone here knows it." The collective gasp from the dining room was visceral. 50 well-heeled guests shifted uncomfortably in their velvet chairs, their eyes darting between my father's ashen face and the explosive legal documents resting on the table. Mr. Washington, who had been sitting with polite detachment, suddenly leaned forward, his sharp gaze locking onto the foreclosure notice. His posture shifted from a potential family ally to a highly alert corporate predator. Richard crumpled the thick paper in his hands, his knuckles turning stark white. He looked wildly around the room, desperate to salvage his crumbling kingdom. "This is a sick, pathetic joke," he bellowed, his voice cracking with a high-pitched panic that completely destroyed his commanding patriarch persona. "Do not listen to her. She is a disgruntled, mentally unstable girl who cannot handle her sister's success. She forged these documents to ruin our night." Barbara let out a shrill, hysterical laugh, reaching out to grasp Mrs. Washington's forearm. "Yes, exactly," she stammered, her diamond bracelets clattering together. "Blair has always been prone to these dramatic, jealous episodes. We are doing wonderfully. The European merger is proceeding perfectly. We are practically swimming in capital." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I simply reached into my black leather portfolio and pulled out the next stack of evidence. If you are swimming in capital Barbara, then why did the bank flag a $25,000 yacht charter charge as an overdraft risk yesterday morning? I asked, projecting my voice so every single guest could hear the exact figures. Why did you finance $15,000 worth of white orchids using a high-interest personal loan that is currently 90 days past due? I tossed the financial ledgers onto the table, letting the pages spread out across the pristine white tablecloth. Let us talk about the European merger, Richard, the merger that does not actually exist. Your import business lost its three primary overseas suppliers 2 years ago. Since then, you have been actively falsifying your corporate revenue streams to secure commercial loans. You leveraged this mansion to the absolute breaking point to hide your bankruptcy, and when the equity ran dry, you decided to use Whitney to secure a bailout. Mr. Washington stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He ignored Richard completely and looked directly at me. Explain that last part, he demanded, his voice cold and authoritative. I turned my attention to the patriarch of the Atlanta elite. Richard and Barbara are entirely bankrupt, Mr. Washington, I explained methodically. They lack the liquid capital to pay the vendors for this wedding. The entire Lake Como event is a meticulously staged theatrical production designed to convince your family that they are your financial equals. They needed Andre to marry into the family so they could trick him into signing an investment deal that would secretly bail out their sinking import company. They demanded I hand over $200,000 in cash by tomorrow to keep the Italian vendors from canceling the charade. Richard surged forward, his fists balled at his sides, his face contorted with a primal, desperate rage. "You ungrateful little witch!" he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "I am your father. I put a roof over your head. I paid for your existence. You owe me your absolute respect. You are going to stop lying right now, or I will destroy you." The sheer audacity of his demand for respect triggered the final, most devastating phase of my execution plan. I reached into my portfolio one last time and retrieved the heavily encrypted notarized file containing the banking records. "You did not pay for my existence, Richard," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly icy whisper that silenced the entire room. "You stole my future." I slammed the banking records down on top of the foreclosure notice. 10 years ago, my paternal grandmother left a trust fund containing exactly $150,000 explicitly designated for my college education. It was supposed to unlock on my 18th birthday, but instead of handing over my inheritance, you and Barbara walked into the bank, submitted falsified custodial documents, and committed felony forgery by faking my signature on the withdrawal slips. Whitney let out a sharp gasp, stepping back from the table as if the documents were on fire. I looked at my sister, my gaze utterly merciless. "You thought you were naturally superior, Whitney. You thought you earned that brand new Porsche Macan before your freshman year. You thought your elite sorority memberships and luxury vacations were a testament to our parents' success. They were not. They bought your car and your social status using my stolen college tuition. They drained my entire trust fund while watching me work overnight shifts and drown in predatory student loans just to survive." The dining room descended into absolute chaos. Guests were actively whispering, pointing, and backing away from my parents as if they were carrying a highly contagious disease. The polished, affluent suburban facade had been entirely stripped away, exposing the rotting criminal core beneath it. Barbara collapsed into a dining chair, burying her face in her hands, her loud theatrical sobs echoing uselessly against the mahogany walls. She looked small, pathetic, and utterly broken. There was no more grand matriarch, only a desperate thief caught with her hands in the vault. Richard stood paralyzed. His chest heaved as he stared at the forged signatures displayed openly on the table. The undeniable proof of his felony grand larceny was sitting right in front of the most powerful people he knew. He had no threats left to make. He had no financial leverage. His reputation, his business, his home, and his freedom were all simultaneously evaporating. I looked at the man who had spent 33 years calling me a disappointment. He was completely dismantled. The arrogant patriarch had been permanently erased, replaced by a terrified bankrupt criminal staring down the barrel of a federal indictment. The silence in the room was absolute. Andre stepped forward, his face twisted into an ugly mask of wounded pride and aggressive entitlement. He moved to stand between me and the dining table, attempting to physically block my access to Mr. Washington. He raised his hand, pointing a manicured finger at my face. "Listen to me very carefully," Blair Andre growled, dropping the polite executive facade completely. "I do not care what kind of petty family drama you are trying to stir up. You are trespassing at a private event. You are making wild, unsubstantiated claims to ruin my fiancé, and I will not allow it. I am calling building security to have you escorted out in handcuffs. You are done here." I looked at Andre, taking in his desperate attempt to salvage the evening. He believed that if he could just get me out of the building, he could spin a story to his parents, marry Whitney, and finalize the corporate bailout with Richard's fake import business. He was a parasite desperately trying to keep his host alive. I smiled, a slow, predatory expression that made Andre hesitate. "I am not going anywhere, Andre," I replied smoothly. "And you really should not be threatening to call security or the police. In fact, law enforcement is the absolute last thing you want anywhere near this dining room tonight." I reached back into my black leather portfolio. There was one final dossier remaining. I pulled it out and slapped it onto the table, sliding it directly past Andre and straight into the waiting hands of Mr. Washington. The older man looked down at the heavy stack of paper, his sharp eyes narrowing as he read the title page. "What is this?" Mr. Washington asked, his voice low and dangerous. "That is the real reason your son is so eager to marry into this bankrupt family," I explained, keeping my voice perfectly level so the entire room could hear. "Richard and Barbara were trying to scam you, Mr. Washington, but your son is actively trying to scam them right back. It is a mutually assured destruction masquerading as a high society wedding." Andre lunged for the dossier, his face turning an ashen shade of gray. "Give that back," he shouted, his voice cracking with sudden panic. "These are forged. She is a corporate spy." Mr. Washington stood up, moving with a terrifying quiet authority. He placed his large hand flat over the documents, stopping Andre dead in his tracks. "Do not touch these papers," Andre, his father, commanded, "and shut your mouth. Let the woman speak." I nodded respectfully to the patriarch of the Washington family. "Your son runs an investment fund in Atlanta," I continued. "On paper, it looks like a highly successful private equity firm. But my company specializes in artificial intelligence auditing. We ran a deep forensic analysis on his capital distribution. Andre is operating a sophisticated Ponzi scheme. He creates shell companies, inflates their valuations, and uses those fake assets to secure commercial loans to pay his early investors." The guests gasped. Mrs. Washington stood up, clutching her evening bag, her face frozen in absolute horror. "That is a lie," Andre stammered, sweating profusely now. "My fund is completely legitimate." "You are heavily leveraged," I corrected him immediately, "and your investors are getting nervous. You needed a legitimate, tangible asset to anchor your portfolio before the federal regulators caught on to the missing capital. That is why you were so desperate to acquire my technology company for a pathetic $200,000 at the coffee shop this week. When I rejected your predatory offer, you fell back on your secondary survival plan. You decided to use Richard." I pointed to the documents under Mr. Washington's hand. "Turn to page 4, sir. You will see a draft application for a federal business development grant." Andre took my father's falsified corporate tax returns and packaged Richard's failing import business into a distressed asset portfolio. Andre was going to submit that portfolio to the federal government to secure millions in grant money. He planned to pocket the federal funds, pay off his angry private investors, and let Richard's business quietly dissolve. Mr. Washington scanned the documents, his eyes darting rapidly across the highlighted financial discrepancies and the printed federal grant applications bearing his son's signature. The silence from the Washington family side of the room was heavy and lethal. "He is committing federal wire fraud," I announced clearly. By falsifying asset valuations and transmitting those documents across state lines, he has triggered a massive federal investigation. I submitted this exact dossier to the Securities and Exchange Commission whistleblower portal this morning. The authorities are already building the indictment. Mr. Washington slowly closed the dossier. He looked at his son, and the disgust in his eyes was absolute. The generational wealth, the pristine family reputation, the old money legacy of the Washington name in Atlanta was about to be dragged through the mud by a reckless, fraudulent scheme. Mr. Washington said, his voice deadly quiet. Is this true? Did you leverage our family name to run a shell game? Dad, please, Andre begged, holding his hands up defensively. It is just a temporary cash flow issue. The market turned. I was going to fix it after the wedding. I just needed the corporate merger to go through. You are a disgrace, Mr. Washington hissed. He turned to his wife. We are leaving, now. Mrs. Washington did not hesitate. She picked up her coat and walked past Andre without looking at him. Mr. Washington grabbed his son by the collar, lifting him off his feet. You are coming with us, and you are calling your legal team. This wedding is completely canceled. Do not ever speak to these people again. They dragged Andre out. Whitney let out an agonizing scream, dropping to her knees. Barbara fainted into her chair. I stood perfectly calm, watching Richard remain completely, utterly powerless. I left the private dining room without looking back. Behind me, the chaotic symphony of my family total collapse echoed through the elegant hallways of the dining club, but it faded the moment I stepped out into the crisp, freezing night air. My driver held the door of my car open. I slid into the leather back seat, feeling an incredible, weightless sense of absolute peace. The long, dark night passed in perfect silence within the secure glass walls of my penthouse. I slept better than I had in a decade. When dawn finally broke, casting a brilliant crimson light across the city skyline, the second phase of my execution plan was already running on autopilot. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee and opened my secure laptop. Silas and Nora had left a brief, satisfying update in my encrypted inbox. The commercial bank had not wasted a single minute. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, a fleet of black sport utility vehicles pulled up the long, manicured driveway of my parents' Connecticut estate. Bank officials, accompanied by local law enforcement officers, arrived to execute the immediate seizure of the property. Richard and Barbara were violently jolted from their sleep. They were given less than 1 hour to gather a few essential personal belongings before the locks were permanently changed. I watched the live security feed that my team had accessed from the street cameras. It was a picture of pure, unadulterated devastation. Richard stood on the frost-covered lawn wearing a rumpled bathrobe, his hands trembling as he watched federal contractors board up the front doors of the mansion he had used to terrorize me for 33 years. Barbara was sitting on a decorative stone bench near the driveway, shivering in the freezing wind, clutching a single designer handbag she had managed to salvage. Her suburban fortress, her country club prestige, and her entire identity were locked away behind heavy metal chains. Whitney was standing next to them, looking completely hollowed out. She had been unceremoniously dumped and blocked by Andre the second they left the restaurant last night. She was still wearing the same white silk gown from the rehearsal dinner, her mascara smeared down her cheeks, holding a single cardboard box. She had no wedding, no wealthy husband, and now no home to return to. They were utterly homeless, standing on the frozen grass, watching their fake empire get dismantled brick by brick. Back in my warm, quiet penthouse, my personal cell phone began to light up. It started as a slow vibration against the marble kitchen island, but within minutes it escalated into a relentless, desperate frenzy. I picked up the device and watched the notifications stack up on the locked screen. The numbers climbed higher and higher, a digital manifestation of their absolute terror. 136 missed calls. The sheer volume of their desperation was staggering. They had spent my entire life ignoring me, dismissing my achievements, and treating my existence as a burdensome obligation. Now they were dialing my number like it was the only lifeline left in the universe. I opened my voicemail inbox. There were exactly 56 recorded messages waiting for me. I set my coffee mug down, tapped the screen, and placed the phone on speaker mode. I wanted to hear the exact sound of their broken arrogance. The first voicemail began playing, filling my pristine kitchen with the sound of hyperventilating sobs. It was Barbara. Blair. Please pick up the phone, my mother wailed, her voice cracking with raw, unfiltered panic. The bank is here. They are kicking us out. They locked the doors and we are standing in the cold. Please, honey, you have to help us. We have absolutely nowhere to go. There was a pause filled only with the sound of her jagged breathing and the distant noise of a drill changing the locks on the mansion. I clicked to the next message. Blair. I am begging you. Barbara cried, her tone completely devoid of the haughty superiority she had weaponized just 12 hours ago. You are the best daughter. You have always been the smartest, the most capable person in this family. We were wrong. We were so incredibly wrong about everything. Richard is having chest pains and Whitney cannot stop screaming. Please, we know you have money. We know your company is successful. We need your help to survive. Just wire us something to get a hotel room. We will do anything you want. I listened to message after message. The progression of their voicemails was a fascinating psychological study. First came the shock, then the bargaining, and finally the complete surrender. Whitney left a message next, her voice trembling and wet with tears. Blair, please answer. My sister begged, the arrogant golden child persona entirely shattered. Andre completely blocked my number. His family canceled all the vendor contracts. I have nothing left. Mom and Dad have no money to help me. I am sleeping in the back of Dad's car tonight. Please, you are my big sister. I am so sorry I laughed at you. I will work for you. I will do whatever you say. Please just send us enough to get a warm room. The irony was absolutely exquisite. Less than 24 hours ago, they had stood in a room full of millionaires and ordered me to pay for a lavish party or be exiled from the family. They had gleefully threatened to throw me away over $200,000 they thought they could extort from my accounts. Now they were begging for pocket change just to avoid freezing in a parked vehicle. They had demanded a financial tribute to validate their fake superiority, and in return I had handed them the unvarnished reality of their incompetence. I stood there looking out over the sprawling city, letting the pathetic sound of their begging echo through my penthouse, filling the empty space with pure silence. I picked up the phone from the kitchen island and walked toward the expansive glass doors leading to my wraparound terrace. The automated sensors detected my movement and smoothly slid the heavy glass panels open. I stepped onto the sprawling balcony. The morning fog had lifted entirely, revealing the vast expanse of the ocean stretching beyond the city harbor. The cold, salty breeze whipped through my hair, carrying the sharp and bracing scent of the sea. It was a beautiful, unforgiving morning. My phone was still playing the voicemails. I stood at the glass railing and listened to the final few seconds of my father's message. His voice, once a booming instrument of control and intimidation, was now reduced to a pathetic, wavering whisper. Blair, please. He begged, the sound of passing cars rushing in the background. I do not have a backup plan. The banks froze everything. My import business is locked. The lawyers will not even take my calls without a retainer. You are the only one who can fix this. You are my daughter. I am begging you to save us. The message ended with a sharp click automatically rolling into the next identical plea. I looked out over the crashing waves of the ocean, waiting for the familiar heavy knot of guilt to form in my chest. For 33 years, I had been conditioned to carry their burdens. I had been trained to internalize their failures and sacrifice my own well-being to maintain their fragile suburban illusion. Whenever they demanded a piece of my soul, I was supposed to offer it willingly. But as I stood there bathed in the bright morning sunlight, I felt absolutely nothing. There was no lingering anger. There was no residual sadness. There was no spiteful joy. There was only a profound, crystalline peace. The kind of peace that comes from amputating a necrotic limb. They were no longer my family. They were simply consequences playing out in real time entirely separate from my existence. They had chosen their path. They had chosen to steal my trust fund to buy sports cars and sorority memberships. They had chosen to launch a smear campaign against me to protect their own fragile egos. They had chosen to try and scam an arrogant fund manager to save their bankrupt empire. Every single disaster they were currently experiencing was the direct mathematical result of their own malicious choices. I had merely handed the calculator over to the authorities. I looked down at the glowing screen of my phone. The notification bubble displayed dozens of unread messages and missed calls. Whitney was still typing out frantic, incoherent apologies. Barbara was leaving yet another voicemail about how cold it was outside. I did not need to hear another word. I pressed my thumb against the screen, swiped down to open the notification center, and firmly tapped the button labeled Mark as read. Instantly, the red notification bubbles vanished. The screen cleared. The desperate, frantic digital noise was completely wiped away. I pressed the side button locking the phone screen and slipped the device into the pocket of my blazer. The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my entire life. It was the sound of absolute freedom. I turned my back on the ocean and walked inside the glass doors sliding shut behind me, sealing out the cold wind. I walked past the kitchen through the sleek living area and opened the double doors leading into my executive boardroom. The room was already buzzing with focused high-level energy. Silas and Nora sat at the massive conference table surrounded by my top-tier data analysts and legal advisors. Holographic displays and digital whiteboards illuminated the walls, projecting the real-time analytics of our latest corporate acquisition. When I crossed the threshold, the low murmur of conversation immediately ceased. Every single person in the room stopped what they were doing and turned to look at me. There was no condescension in their eyes. There was no quiet judgment, no silent calculations about my worth, and no whispered criticisms about my appearance or my lifestyle. There was only absolute unwavering respect. These were some of the most brilliant minds in the financial technology sector, and they were here because they believed in my vision. I had built this empire from the ground up, fighting through the financial sabotage of my own bloodline to create a company that dictated terms to the global market. "Good morning, boss," Silas said, a genuine smile breaking across his face. The federal regulators confirmed receipt of the Washington dossier. They are moving forward with the indictments. Our legal team is also tracking the commercial bank seizures. The liquidation process for the Connecticut estate is officially underway. Everything executed flawlessly. I nodded, pulling out the ergonomic leather chair at the head of the long table. The chair my father always thought he deserved, but could never actually earn. "Excellent work, everyone," I said, taking my seat and looking around at my chosen family. The people who actually showed up, who valued my intelligence, and who stood by me when the stakes were highest. "File the remaining documentation and close the operation. We are completely done looking backward." I opened my primary tablet and swiped the display to the main presentation screen. The data from our newest multinational target populated the wall. Let us move on to the actual business of the day. I continued, my voice steady and commanding. "We have a hostile takeover to finalize before lunch, and I want to see the updated revenue projections for the European markets." The room immediately sprang into full action. Keyboards clicked, analysts pulled up their datasets, and my company surged forward. I sat at the head of the table, surrounded by brilliance, loyalty, and success. I had completely eliminated the toxic weight of my past, and my future was an endless, unbothered horizon of absolute victory.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river, years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me. You were always part of me. I am my Father's daughter. In every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. You taught me strength is not in power, but in kindness when it's hard. You taught me how to keep on going when the road grows cold and dark. Every lesson, every story, every laugh around the flame lies within me like an echo, calling softly through my name. And when I face my greatest battles, when I feel I can't go on, I can hear your voice beside me saying, child, you're stronger than you know. I am my Father's daughter. In every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. One day the snow will cover footprints, one day the fire will burn low, but the things a father gives his daughter are the things that never go. Not the gold or not the stories, not the battles that he won, but the quiet way he loved her and the woman she becomes. I am my Father's daughter, and I always will remain. Through every triumph, every loss,